So the virus that shall not be named and the cultural conflict that has popped up around it actually reminds me a lot of what I refer to as the TSA sexual assault blitzkrieg of 2010. As far as the way the conflict is playing out, the media's reaction to it, so on and so forth. In fact, that was my awakening to what the media is. Before that, I didn't really watch the news, and I had absolutely no idea how bad the media was, how how much they controlled the narrative. I didn't realize they had basically become the full-on priestly class in the propaganda wing of, the powers that be, or the government. But the difference back then, or the problem back then, was that when it comes to flying, um, not very many people fly at all. Like maybe 10% of the population flies, period. I mean, maybe more than that fly occasionally, but it's like 10% or less that fly with any frequency at all. So there was a backlash. There was a massive backlash when the strip search scanners and the groping came out. It was intense. But there were so few people that knew anything about it or really understood it because no one flies. And so these people, even though there was an intense backlash, that there was nothing these people could do because it didn't affect enough enough of the population. And it was just kind of amazing to me watching the media. It was surreal. It was surreal watching the media manipulate that entire controversy. Just telling you what the narrative is, telling you what to believe, coming out with their bullshit polls that always seem to be 80% what they want. I don't know what that. There's some magic number, something magic about the number 80%. Like, well, 80% of Americans agree with what we're telling you, so case closed and it's over. And I remember after, I mean, they played that circus to its full potential for the outrage views. But after a few weeks, they had their circus and then they wrapped it up. And they just dropped it. They were like, oh, well, narrative's over. American people have accepted this. And then they just moved on. The difference today, however, is that this COVID nonsense doesn't just affect a tiny fraction of the population. This is something that affects the normie. So the backlash is much stronger and much stronger in numbers, not just in intensity, because this affects the daily life of Joe Normie. And if it affects the normie, like it's not, they can't just make the opposition go away. But I had the sobering thought I had the other day is that this belief, this new religion that has popped up around the virus will be with us for the rest of our lives. It's not going away. As insane and nonsensical as the beliefs are in lockdowns and masks, and I mean the anti-science, anti-common sense mentality behind it, as ridiculous as it is, it's never going away. Not in our lifetimes. And the problem is, it is essentially a religion. And I mean, I myself have I was raised in a very, religious household, and, kind of walked away from that myself. But that's often kind of a rare thing. Like if people are raised Muslim or raised Christian, it's kind of rare for people, especially if they truly believed in it, starting when they were kids or when they're adults, when they convert. It's very rare for people to walk away from that. That's because when you buy into a religion, you invest way too much of yourself. You invest the way you're invested. It's it takes an incredible amount of self knowledge and critical thinking and humility to change your mind on that and to actually walk away from it. And this comes down to psychology. There has been a psychological study, probably I think multiple psych studies, where essentially what they did is they would bring people in and then they would give them, I forget exactly how it worked, but I think they would give them like a set of like facts or just here, it's like, here, study up on this, you need to know these facts for this test. So they like study up on it. And then what the experiment is after they've sort of drilled these facts into their head, they give them another piece of paper and they present them with evidence that contradicts what they were just told, because what they were the facts they were given are not facts, they're actually incorrect. So that, and then they're presented with the evidence of why not only is this wrong, what we just had you study was wrong, but here's why. People didn't back down. Like, it's like once they're told this is true and they choose to believe that that's true, people would double down in the face of evidence on the incorrect beliefs, on the incorrect things they previously believed. So it turns out we are wired to stick to our guns, and it's very hard to change our minds because it's painful. Like it takes, it's painful to like admit that you're wrong and go back on something that you thought was true. And with something like a religion, it's that, but on steroids. It's far more intense. Like when you believe in a religion, like you change things about your life. You sacrifice things. You give things up. In some cases, you do horrible things to other people. In, this Coviet religion, like not only do you sacrifice and like wear the mask and stay at home and give up social events, but you say the most horrible things imaginable to other people online. You shame people. You try to deplatform people. Like you do horrible things in the name of this religion. So when you are presented with facts and evidence and reason that shows just how ridiculous your beliefs are, it doesn't matter. You're invested. People have invested their entire persona, their personalities, the core of who they are. They have tied their identity to this religion. And once you do that, it is too painful and humiliating for pretty much everyone to admit that they were wrong. Because, I mean, to admit that you were wrong and to face the actual facts and evidence. I mean, who's ready to admit that they contributed to these lockdowns and shame people for even being against the lockdowns? Once you show people the evidence that we very possibly caused millions of people to starve to death by destroying the global supply chain through overnight communism, no one's going to face that. No one's going to face the fact that they were part of the acolyte horde of the elites that pushed for these lockdowns, an absolute crime against humanity. Once you're invested in a religion and you burn someone alive for being a witch, you're not going to admit you were wrong. You're never going to leave that religion because it's too painful and humiliating and horrific to realize and accept the evil that you propagated. So that's it. And my only hope at this point, I mean, it's not going away. My only hope at this point is this becomes something akin to the climate change narrative. Because the climate change narrative, I mean, it's equally as silly, but it doesn't affect our daily lives in the same way. I mean, the lockdowns and all the COVID stuff certainly is now, but I don't think they can really maintain this level of insanity, and certainly not globally. So my only hope is this kind of becomes something like the climate change narrative, where it just becomes one more ridiculous tenet of the blue church religion. It's just one of the other silly things they believe in. And for the most part, it doesn't really affect our daily lives. Like, the climate change narrative does actually have an impact on governments in places around the world, where governments have some governments have some extra taxes or regulations, or they'll do serious harm to some industries, and um, your wallet through taxation and such. But it's not all countries, and it's just this silly thing that doesn't really affect most of us. I'm thinking and I'm hoping that the COVID religion will become something similar. Like, some countries will continue to use some form of lockdown occasionally, or use it for regulation or some other kind of tax here and there. But globally, for the most part, I think it's going to fade away into that thing where it's always with us and it's annoying and it's ridiculous and it's in the background, but it's there. So, as absurd and anti science and anti human and unbelievable as this religion is, people living today are going to go to their deathbeds believing that cloth masks and lockdowns can stop viruses from being viruses.